So, what I miss? Anything happen? Anything happen I missed while I was gone? Anything I should know about?
Eddie
Good
expanded
Lord.
his tea game.
Oh,
No,
really?
No, I didn't.
You drinking Irish tea now in honor? Eddie?
No, sir.
Good afternoon to you on a Wednesday. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison, you just heard from. Jimmy Cook here as well, who capably and probably, I don't even know the word for on an improved level. I will tell you this, Jimmy Cook. I was yesterday actually on an airplane somewhere over the Atlantic, and I got a text message that said simply, Jimmy has been killing it in your absence.
Wow.
The shows have been great all week.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the company for the support through the last 6 shows or so. It's been a lot of fun. Eddie and I have a lot of fun, but I texted you this yesterday, and I mean it as much then as I do now. Very happy to have you back in the saddle. Very happy to have the chairman of the board back with us here over at Querying Company.
I appreciate that, and it's good to be back.
Words.
It was good, and again, and I'll only say this once, and then we'll move along. Admittedly, it's tough because I planned a vacation, each year I do it. Probably next year will not be, I'm guessing. But in the past, I've always planned a vacation for the week that we go at the end of October and into early November, simply because I can't take vacations really in the summertime, which is the typical sports talk radio time to do it. And in the past, when I've done it, and I've picked a Colts game that was seemingly, at the time the schedule was released, an innocuous one on the schedule, I've been able to kind of get away with it, for lack of a better phrase. This time, obviously, all hell broke loose, and I do feel bad, and there was a feeling of guilt, but at the same time, I needed a vacation just to get away and cleanse the palate and re-energize. So glad to be back. Plenty to talk about, including, I guess I'll give you, Jimmy, the choice here of whether we start with Indiana football or the Colts, because there are massive stories on both sides of it. The one to you that seems to have generated the most buzz would be which?
I think from an enthusiasm standpoint, it has to be IU football being where they are and the buzz about them in the college football playoff, the way they talked about it from a pundit standpoint last night about how being a one-loss Indiana, we'd heard this from a couple of people, Thor Nystrom to be one of them, but a one-loss Indiana team, if that winds up happening, can still get into the college football playoff. A lot of reaffirming those beliefs for Hoosiers fans in this dream season that they're currently on. And some would tell you maybe it's not a dream season if Cignetti stays long-term. But yes, Colts are always the dominant story, and there is a lot to get into in that forum. But Jake, for me, and I said this yesterday, Curt Cignetti has a chance to make good on almost every promise that he told to the media, including the one that I laughed at, which was being in the Big Ten championship game. Like, that's a real possibility for them now with only a couple games left to play.
Now, here is, to me, and there is plenty of Colts non-news to talk about, which we're going to get into. But for me, with Indiana, it comes down to this. I think we can safely now say, assuming that they are going to beat Purdue, okay?
Sure. I think Cignetti's going to win that game by like 30. I'm very excited for it.
As many as he wants to win by, right?
Yep.
Now, the thing is, assuming that they beat Purdue, if they beat Ohio State, they're in. Period.
Yes.
If they lose to Michigan and then turn around and win in Columbus, they're in.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
It comes down. That is the ticket punch game. They could lose to the Wolverines by 14, and if they turn around and they win in Columbus over number 2 Ohio State, they're in. So the Michigan game, I think there's a little bit of almost pressure taken off that game, to be honest with you. You want to sustain, right, and get yourself the best seed, whatever else.
But it's
remarkable.
The only worry I have with that is, and to your point, you're just outlining all the scenarios here, but I'd feel like you can, sorry, Purdue, this is just where you're at right now this year. If I'm an Indiana fan and they beat Michigan this weekend, they were favored by 14 last I saw. Not that that matters, but just for reference, because that's still a number that is mind-boggling to me. If they beat Michigan, they're going to the playoff because you assume they're going to take care of business against Purdue, and Ohio State game's gravy. Because the Ohio State game, either you win that and you're in the Big Ten championship game, or you lose it, but you're a one-loss team in a Power 5 conference and you're going to the playoff. So you take care of Michigan, and your path is set as long as you take care of business against Purdue. But to your point, you also have a safeguard. If you lose to Michigan and you beat Ohio State, you're also in. You just got to keep it at one loss. And not let it be Purdue. That's your big goal the rest of these final 3 games if you're Indiana.
Yeah, the fact that Indiana is there, I mean, I'm stating the obvious, is truly remarkable, right? And they have not missed a beat even through injury and everything else, and the way that they're I realize that strength of schedule has not been great for them, but you're doing what you need to do, and that is not only winning those games, but winning them emphatically. They're winning them by the same margin that a team that should be ranked in the college football playoff would win said games. The Colts yesterday did kind of what the Colts do or don't do. And I was thinking about this yesterday as I was following along at the trade deadline. And, an interesting question was posed, which was, it's always easy to talk about. It's always easy to opine with, here's what a team should do. Here's what a team should go after. But then you ask yourself, okay, that's fine, but what would they give? How do they get in that position? I would love to be able to have, whatever, to drive this car, okay? I'd love to have this kind of a car. My buddy Michael, when we went up to the Men at Work concert, has a Maserati. It was awesome. We drove I'd love to have a Maserati. Okay, fine. But to get the Maserati, like, what am I going to give up to get that, right? Am I going to sell my car? What am I going to do financially to get the Maserati? It's one thing to just say you want something. It's the other to say, what do you have to get it? And for the Colts trade deadline, I realized that the trade deadline in the NFL is not the NBA. It is not typically one that teams are active. Oftentimes, if you are making a trade deadline move, it means either A, that you feel like you are right on the brink of crossing the finish line, or B, you're blowing the whole thing up, right? There's really kind of no in between. And the Colts are kind of in between those two. Having said that, one of the things that I think if you look at in terms of trade deadlines that take place, oftentimes if you're going out and you're getting yourself a piece of, a tight end or another cornerback or something like that, what you're giving up a lot of times is a future draft pick of some sort, a 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick. I mean, yes, if you're going after a big-time star, you're giving up a future number 1 probably, right? But more often than not, you are surrendering or giving up a conditional, 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick, somewhere in that area, right? If not a former 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick from recent history, like they did with Nyheim Hines, for example. But if you really look at, and this is where I look at it, and I go with Chris Ballard, and yeah, I'm going to be critical here. Give me a year in the last 6 years off the top of your head, Jimmy.
2021.
2021. Okay? Here are the Colts' 4th, 5th round picks, okay? Kylan Granson, Sean Davis, Sam Ehlinger, Mike Strawn was a 7th rounder, Ehlinger was a 6th rounder. Will Fry's a good pick at 7. Don't get me wrong. 7th rounder, good pick. But the Colts are always so heavy on accumulating draft capital and loading up on those 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks. But how many of them are truly trajectory changers for them? So is there really any value? You could sit there and say, we're going to hold on to our upcoming 3rd round pick or 4th round pick or 5th round pick because we really covet that area of the draft. And so therefore we're not going to go get a piece that can help us win right now or get us over a point right now or improve us right now because we really want that piece in the future. But how many of those pieces that you have held on to in the past are guys that are realistically guys that are putting you over the top? Bernard Ryman was a good pick in the 3rd round. Nick Cross, jury's still out, but I think it's probably a good pick. But it's not like any of them are really game changers, right? It's not like any of them are franchise changers. They're nice, solid pieces. But at some point, you've got to be willing to gamble a little bit. And Chris Ballard has not been a gambler player, and I get that. And he's probably a solid 500 in that strategy, but the time probably is now for him to be more aggressive because if you look at the Richardson situation, and I know that this is a subject that you guys talked a ton about while I was gone, the reality is this. Whether the Richardson situation was truly a decision about just allowing him to grow and feeling like they need to pull back the reins a little bit, whether the Richardson situation was truly a disciplinary act or whether it was a getting him physically healthier act, which is entirely possible. Any of those three things, the bottom line is, from an aesthetic standpoint and just an optics standpoint, it doesn't look good, clearly, and it sends the message to a lot of people, on one hand, that you want to win now, but then when Flacco goes out and plays the way he does and you go ahead and stick with him, then what that is sending the message is that it looks like you are starting to move in a different direction from the direction that everything was centered around going into the year. And that's not me hedging what the Colts said at the beginning of the year they're going to do. That's me saying, if you are inside that locker room, you absolutely could feel like you are part of a franchise or part of a team that is going in a totally different direction than you originally going into the year thought, or just being completely confused as to what the franchise is doing and what direction they're going, and losing your locker room altogether, to the point where clearly I think at this point the season is, and it's hard to say this halfway through because stranger things have happened. But Jimmy, would you agree with this? The season feels like a wash. So at this point, you would think at the trade deadline they would have been not aggressive, but more open to making some moves that put them in position for like younger pieces that can come in and help them moving forward, because what they have right now, it looks like they're moving away from.
I mean, yes, I believe the season is a wash. I think that the best case scenario for them is perhaps stumbling their way into the playoffs and then getting trounced in the first round by whichever team of Houston, Buffalo, whoever winds up being that 2 seed. And you're right. If I saw the writing on the wall, I would be moving pieces to be able to either A, build around Anthony Richardson if what you're saying about still believing him is true, or B, trying to either get younger or stockpile more assets to have a full-on rebuild that you've been kind of kicking the can down the road post Andrew Luck. Unfortunately, I don't think they believe that internally. I think they still believe that there is success to be had this season. Clearly they do in some regard, because you wouldn't turn to Joe Flacco just solely for punishment and dedicate your season to him the way that you publicly have the last 2 weeks. So while I think the season's a wash, Jake, I don't think the Colts do, which is why I argued yesterday, even though the trade deadline in the NFL does not produce the type of blockbuster moves at the end that the NBA or the MLB does, you're claiming to be in win now mode, and there are still tight end, cornerback, etc. holes on this roster where you could have tried to better yourself if you legitimately think Houston looks vulnerable. If you think that as their receiving core starts to get a little banged up, that, hey, the gap's still there, even though they have the tie break, we can make up ground there. Well, throw your precedent out the door and go make a move. And instead, they didn't go your view, and my view as well, of the season being a wash, and they also didn't go to play now. They did what they've done pretty much every trade deadline since Chris Ballard's been here, which is they stood pat and they hope for the best.
The big news also yesterday coming out, and I'm not sure what time it came out, so maybe this happened while you were on the air, Jimmy. I'm not sure. The Ryan Kelly news going to IR. Did that happen? What time did that come out yesterday?
Just after we were off the air during John's show.
So can you, for our listeners that might not have heard John or that were confused by it or not aware of it, we have talked about there are 2 levels of IR. The first is that you are done for the year and you're not coming back, and the other is the DeForest Buckner IR, which is you go on it and then you come back and you play. Ryan Kelly, and we'll get to what this means in a second, but Ryan Kelly's IR is which?
Short-term IR. Shane Steichen told the media today they hope to get him back at some point this season. So not season-ending for him, but you're just being hopeful that he's able to return at some point. They're not going to put him on season-ending if there's even a chance he can come back, and that is the avenue they've chosen here. So short-term IR for Ryan Kelly.
Okay. Ryan Kelly at the beginning of the season. I am absolutely certain on this, and I'm not alone in this thought, granted. But I'll give Chris Ballard credit here. Okay? Fair is fair. There are a lot of areas where I've been critical of Chris Ballard, and I personally think the Chris Ballard era, all signs are indicating towards the point where it's time for a change. It's time for a change, right? You've had this long. You should not be. You absolutely 100% should not be at this point in the tenure of the management of a franchise and still be possibly shaking the magic 8 ball with the start over, blow it up answer circling past and looking like it might land on it at any point, which is where, if you ask Colts fans, what do they think about their team right now? I think the thing that more often than not people would say is directionless. Not to say they don't have somebody leading them in a direction, but what direction is that? It just is. It feels like they are absolutely stuck in neutral. And at this point in the management and the tenure of a general manager, you should not be there. You should have some idea of where you're going. And I'm going to be, steadfast and vociferous about that and probably critical of that a lot. But I also will point out areas where I think Chris Ballard has made shrewd or smart moves. And one of those is this. At the beginning of the year, one of the very first players to report to training camp was Ryan Kelly. And when Ryan Kelly reported to training camp, one of the first things that he said, one of the first storylines that we had for the Colts in the 2024 season was Ryan Kelly, not the Colts, but Ryan Kelly letting people, fans, media, etc., know that the Colts had told him they were not interested at that time in signing him to a contract extension. And it seemed like, not unpopular opinion, but it seemed shrewd at the time, right? Although I think people can kind of understand it because of the injury history of Ryan Kelly. But if you were somebody who truly was going with and investing with and signing players based on sentimentality or loyalty, Ryan Kelly is one of the first you would sign. You would absolutely give him, if he came out and said, which he did, that he was interested in an extension. This is a guy that has come back from challenging times emotionally, personally, certainly physically. He's been a good soldier. He's fought through injury. He's been a quality leader in your locker room. Everything that you would want in a teammate, Ryan Kelly seemingly has been. And everything you would want in an employee, Ryan Kelly seemingly has been. But at the beginning of the year, when he comes out and says, I was hoping to get an extension done, and he says, but the Colts said they weren't interested in that. And then Chris Ballard says, look, we take care of our own. We'd like to keep him in-house, but we're going to do that at the end of the season. I give Ballard credit because what he was doing there was he's sitting there playing blackjack, and he's looking at it, and he's sitting on a 10 or an 11 or something. I don't play blackjack a lot, but you get what I'm saying. And when a lot of people would have gone for it, he decides just to kind of hold and let things go as they may. And in the end, that probably was the right call, Jimmy, because number one, not only have you found out that they have a player that can play seemingly the center position and move into that next year moving forward and be able to play it for a long time, theoretically, unless he gets injured. So you have the heir apparent on the roster, and you had to find that out. You had to find out whether or not you had that guy. If seemingly they do. And secondly, the precedent, the history would indicate that Ryan Kelly, if you were to give him an extension, is going to next year again be available not 100% of the time. And the amount of money that you would go into it if you had given him an extension at the beginning of the season, to be fair, we would be sitting here crucifying Chris Ballard for making that decision at the beginning of the season to extend him and having it go bust. He did not do it. He made the right decision, I believe. And I also think it's one that, even though Ryan Kelly may come back and play this year, Jimmy, I think we can safely say at this point the needle is very closely pointing towards Ryan Kelly not being a member of the Colts beyond this season. Right?
Yeah, and again, there's enough areas to give Chris Ballard credit, but you mentioned it a couple moments ago, and it's my boat as well. It's been more of the same the further you get into his tenure as general manager of the Colts. Like, there's been some bright moves for certain. Like, we were talking about it before we went on the air today. The DeForest Buckner addition, when he gets aggressive and goes out and gets a game-wrecking pass rusher, somebody that can win up front and get after the quarterback and, stymie the run and keep you in games defensively, that's a good move. The problem is those type of consistent moves for development of this team have been few and far between. The good decisions that he's made. Like, yeah, I don't want him to be in a position where you're overpaying for an aging, potentially starting to be ailment-filled offensive lineman. That's not a smart move when you look at the current direction of this franchise. But there's so many other, and I know we're just, because it's the IR move and it is the topic of the day, Chris Ballard deserves credit for that. But regardless of what happens the rest of the way, Jake, I don't want it to get lost, the unknown direction of this franchise, whether it is Flacco, Band-Aid
Right.
quarterback, or still trusting Anthony Richardson. And with all of that cloud around the group, regardless of where you feel about Shane Steichen, because that's a whole show we could do about coaches and GMs being attached at the hip, you need to look at the tenure closer of Chris Ballard. Look from the moment he took control of the front office to this offseason and decide, is it a clear picture of the direction of the franchise? And if not, when most of the decisions have been him, do you trust him to right a ship that has not been written in 7 years? And I don't.
That's fair. Again, at some point, right, you have to say, okay, what are we doing here? How many resets are you allowed, right? How many resets are you allowed?
It's a fair
By the
question.
way, what kit are you wearing?
So I wore a Scotland jersey today because you're back from Scotland, and it felt apropos to do so. So I pulled out a Scotland kit today.
May I ask how or why you have a Scotland? I mean, I appreciate in Scotland, by the way, it's fabulous.
I wanted a Cinderella story to root for in the Euros this past year, so I went on eBay and bought a Scotland jersey for $10 over the summer. And they lost in group play. Did not go well for them. They've not made it out of the group stage.
So
I
it
think,
truly
ever.
was a Cinderella.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
I didn't know this, and I'll get into this a little bit later. There was this is the relativity of sport, and I find it fascinating. There was a huge sporting event that took place, I don't know, 2 miles from where I was over the course of the week. Huge. That literally stopped a nation. Literally. And I'm like, it made me realize some of the things that we go gaga over here in the States, and you're like, outside of here, how many people? I mean, the States is a little different. I realize, the U.S. is a little different because we're the epicenter in a lot of ways. But some of the sports that I talked about with people, and I did talk about sports with people, I was surprised that they were not really aware of.
You're telling me the Scots also weren't worried about the college football playoff rankings? That wasn't top of mind for them?
They all couldn't believe that Indiana was not higher than where they were. Everybody was saying that, right? I did go to the spot where the opening of Train Spotting was filmed. That was cool.
Nice.
I did like that, yeah. Choose a career. It was great. That part was very, very cool.
Also, our favorite not watched movie of Query and Company apparently continues to step into life.
Literally the only American thing on television in our hotel room the entire time that I was gone, and it was Shawshank Redemption, which we watched, by the way, because what better thing to do when you're overseas than watch Shawshank Redemption? All right, when we come back, there is good news for the Pacers, who are in action tonight, taking on kind of a nemesis, in my opinion, but there is one thing trending in the right direction for the blue and gold. I'll tell you what that is, and I do have gifts for you guys, by the way, that we'll do coming up in just a little bit. Want to also let you know, when I was overseas, I rented a car for one day. I'll get into that. It was a nightmare driving on the left side of the road and doing it from the opposite side of the car. But I managed to avoid any major issue with it. I managed to bring back the car in one good piece, and it looked good. If you want to make sure your car looks good, but now until the end of the year, all you got to do is let them know at Jiffy Lube that you are a member of a car wash program. Point to that sticker in the window, and you're going to get automatically $20 off a signature service oil change and a free tire rotation from Jiffy Lube. Because when you pull in, Jiffy Lube's going to say, you know what, you care about the outside of your car. We want to make sure that under the hood, everything is good there as well and keep you safe when it comes to the tires on the road. Now till the end of the year, again, simply point it out to the Jiffy Lube team member, and you're going to get that automatic deal courtesy of that sticker in your windshield. Pacers Magic tonight. One thing that's trending in the right direction for the blue and gold. I'll tell you what it is next. Are they going to have this guy doing halftime tonight at the Pacer game? Christopher, he doesn't do it anymore, right? The guy that used to be the one-man Village People Act?
Over at Victory Field?
What did I say? What did I say?
You just said a name. You didn't say a spot, but isn't that where he started?
No. You're thinking of Macho Mike. No, Christopher was a guy that is a one-man Village People Act.
Sure, yeah. I know
he hasn't done it in a while,
though,
doing halftime shows. But tonight, the Magic taking on the Pacers over at Gamebridge Fieldhouse.
You missed Simon Says while you were gone. Were you disappointed about that?
You know what? I saw the clip of it, though.
Yeah.
It is. That guy's unbelievable.
Oh, he's the best.
Like, how does he – the Simon Says guy, when he does it, obviously he knows, he's got a rehearsed routine, I would think. Could you actually, if you watched the Simon Says, and for those that are unfamiliar, they do a halftime show where the guy comes out and does a mass Simon Says.
He was an auctioneer in a past life, for certain.
For sure, because he talks really fast.
Yeah.
And then, you're out. Okay, Simon says this, Simon says that, and then you're out. And he narrows it down from like 100 people to 5 in a matter of 3 minutes or something. It's incredible. But if you think about the guy that used to do, that memorized Press Your Luck, and memorized all the patterns of when the whammy would hit.
It's a great documentary, by the way,
right.
If you haven't seen that. Oh, it's
and that
good
guy
stuff.
that won all the money because he videotaped it and memorized the patterns. Does Simon Says guy do the same routine every time? And if you had it, could you watch it over and over and over to know what number of command he gives where you actually need to pay attention? You see what I'm saying?
It's a great question. I feel like that he probably keeps things fresh.
Like I've got it. Okay, my hands are going to be on my head. And it's going to be that for 3 commands, and then I go on my hip. It's going to be that for 4 commands, and then whatever, and you win the thing. But I don't know what you get to win. But either way, it's impressive what he does. Also impressive for the Pacers is the play of, and I was curious about this. This time a week ago, there was big question I felt of. Are Anthony Richardson and Ben Mathurin talking to each other on the phone about which one is more confused about their status with their respective franchise? And I know that Ben Mathurin, Rick Carlisle has talked about it on the wake-up call with KB and Andy when he comes on with them on Tuesday mornings here on The Fan. And, he said, look, this guy's got to play better defensively, and he's got to be a better rebounder. In those areas, clearly he has improved his play because he's been on the floor more, but the real uptick for the Pacers is the fact that by being on the floor more, he has become, I think, their most consistent and has been at times shown to be their most consistent scorer and just a guy that is playing at the level that they need him to play, clearly. And to me, it's very good news for Indiana because Halliburton still, I'm sure you guys talked plenty about that. I mean, there's a lot of question mark about just what's going on there. But Mathurin, if he can be a consistent scorer and force, his elevation and uptick of play, and I don't even know necessarily that it's, and I'm sure Chad Buchanan and Kevin Pritchard and Rick Carlisle would be able to point out nuances or specifics of what I'm talking about. And admittedly, I didn't get to see every minute of every game. But when just looking at his scoring output and what he's been able to do, the reality is that clearly there are areas aside from scoring that they like of what he's doing because that's keeping him on the floor. But when he's on the floor, that is allowing for his offensive game to increase. And that, to me, is the thing that is the most encouraging, is just the way that he's been able to play and give them consistency in an area. He and, at this point, probably Ben Shepherd have been their 2 most consistent guys in areas where they need to find somebody. If Halliburton's not going to be consistent, Jimmy, somebody else is going to have to be.
There were moments very, very early in a season that itself is still very early, just 7 games young for them, where they're sitting near the bottom of offensive efficiency and offensive scoring, or at least at the bottom half of that section of the standings where they were at the top and setting records a year ago in a historical form of offense. And the knocks you want to make on Benedict Mathurin from a defensive standpoint where he has improved, my argument has been his level of defense, just the way he's gotten marginally better in certain areas and being right place, right time for rebounding. That combined with his elite offensive prowess that is next to maybe Halliburton and Siakam best on the team. You could make an argument that he's their best, off the dribble scorer they have on their roster. I've argued that his offensive ability combined with the slight increase on defense is more impactful than the better defensive ability and solid offense that a guy like an Andrew Nembhard or an Aaron Nesmith would bring to the table that in theory could be keeping him out of the starting lineup. He still has to continue to improve, but what he does offensively is so much closer to what the Pacers want from an identity standpoint that I think he's going to inevitably earn that starting spot in a couple weeks.
Does Monday's game lead you to believe that Halliburton has finally broken through and is back to, are we back to vintage Tyrese Halliburton? Or can you get fooled by that?
Yes, you can. And that's why I'd like, just for clarification on it, can you define to me if he was doing what on a nightly basis you'd be able to say he's back?
60% of his shots, 18 points or more, and 8 or more assists.
I think he's there in that regard, and that's fine. But the issue that continues to bog him down is the three-point shooting. That's continuing to be, at least through the first 7 games of the season, he's shooting like 28%, near 30% from three, whereas what you grew accustomed to during the in-season tournament run and in the playoffs is closer to 35, 40% from beyond the arc. Now, he's offsetting that with his distributions and still being efficient everywhere else on the floor, but the three-point shooting is that extra element of his game that puts him amongst the elite at that position. That's the one area that still hasn't been fixed on a consistent nightly basis. And that might just be who he is. I don't know. You've argued this before, Jake. What Halliburton is it? Is it the Halliburton that we got from the in-season tournament, right, or is he closer to the post-injury Halliburton?
Well, I think here's the thing.
Efficiency, he's fine, but three-point range has bugged me.
I think Halliburton, when he had his breakthrough, when Halliburton finally broke through and became a star in the league and was literally playing NBA Jam, like he's on fire for like 3 straight months, he was utilizing his three-point shot to then spread the floor and make everything else available to him. He would come down and 3 feet behind the line just pull up and throw up kind of an ugly shot, and they would go in like all the time. Literally, he was in the zone for like 3 months. And when he started doing that, then people started coming out to guard him further and further outside, and that then allowed him, that facilitated for him to open up the rest of his offense, and he could use his quickness and his first step to get to the basket, to dish, because the floor was opened up and he was getting it to other areas, other players, and everything was flowing through that. Since then, with that shot not falling, quite frankly, people have just backed off of him, and that has stalled down the offense in the way that they want to flow it for him. And I think at times now what he's trying to do is utilize the other areas of his game to then open up the outside shot, and he is rushing three-point shots and taking them at inopportune times. And while at one time he was open at those shots, the book's out on him now, right?
Yeah.
And so he is seeing different looks, and he is having to adjust to them, and quite frankly has not done well adjusting to it.
I think the biggest adjustment for him that he hasn't adjusted from is Buddy Hield. Because prior to that hamstring injury, he had Buddy Hield. He was averaging over 20 points, 10 assists, and 3.5 rebounds. Without Buddy, that dips dramatically to 17, 9.5, and 4.
There's no doubt that Buddy Hield was a comfort zone for him, right?
And for the whole offense, right, Eddie?
Correct. That's what I was getting at here, because of the spacing and the attention that Buddy Hield brought, because teams are going to sag off of Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith. Okay, we're going to make those guys make consistent shots.
And for those, by the way, that don't remember, they really didn't have a choice with Buddy Hield but to move him, because Buddy Hield was a free agent and basically had said to them, I'm going to probably look elsewhere. So they had to get out of him what they could. Jeremiah Johnson going to join us in 20. We'll talk about the Magic, who I think are kind of a pesky matchup, going to be in the Fieldhouse tonight. Plenty of Colts conversation continued on the program as well. And I did come bearing gifts. So I will present to both of you your fabulous, not parting gifts, but rather returning gifts. I brought gifts back, and I'll give you a couple of highlights of where I thought it was very possible that I wasn't going to make it back from Europe. I'll tell you why next. This time last week, actually, it would have been Friday. On Friday, so we went to Dublin. Dublin was wonderful. This time, almost exactly this time a week ago, we were at the Guinness Brewery Tour, which for anybody that goes to Dublin, I would highly recommend it because on the top floor of that brewery is there's a bar up there. Obviously, they serve Guinness, but and you basically overlook the entire city of Dublin, and it's very cool. Went to the Irish Rock and Roll Museum, which was more just a recording studio, but it was of interest to me because we went into the room where, as teenagers, U2 got their first recording rehearsal.
Wow.
And I didn't know Jimmy and I had a recording rehearsal.
What's that? That's right. Very well done, Eddie.
Thank you.
But they played for you the song that they rehearsed when they were like 15, and then they ended up recording in that studio. Sinead O'Connor also recorded in the studio, and Thin Lizzy is like, I almost felt bad for them because they're like, well, you guys know the legend, the rock and roll legend, Thin Lizzy. And I'm like, well, I think everybody knows the song The Boys Are Back in Town, but outside of that, but Thin Lizzy is huge there.
Really?
And the lead singer, notably, is absolutely huge there. And they have a lot regarding that. But we did that.
Thank you, by the way,
Wednesday.
Thank you for your connections to Indianapolis throughout some of your social media posts. It made me feel like I was there.
That's right.
I could just go around
each
the
spot
city,
reminded me of something that here in Indy. And on Friday, we rented a car to drive from Dublin to the cliffs. I'm probably going to mispronounce the name, but the Cliffs of Moher, I believe is how you say it. But the big cliffs that everybody are the famous photos you see in Ireland. Those cliffs are on the west coast. Dublin is on the east coast. So you drive all the way across the island, which is, it's 2.5 hours. But you drive on the left side of the road. That you kind of get used to. But the cars themselves, the steering wheel and everything is on the right side of the car. So not only are you on the opposite side of the road, you're on the opposite side of the car. That, to me, was the biggest. It was your depth perception is just totally off on the left-hand side. So we're driving to the cliffs, and so we're driving through the countryside, right? Just on an interstate, right through the state. Fine. Get used to it pretty quick, okay? So we stopped at a couple of diesel stations, which are beautiful. They have like cafes in them. They're spotlessly clean. Wonderful.
Would you compare them to like a smaller, scaled-down Buc-ee's in terms of their cleanliness?
Excellent question there. In terms of cleanliness, yes, but even more, but less like cheesy and more like literally like a big Starbucks.
Okay.
So get back on the interstate, and I'm looking at, and I'm following on the GPS, and it's saying, once we get off the interstate, and I'm like, okay, it says here we're only 32 miles from the cliffs. But it says 1 hour and 7 minutes. And I'm like, that can't be right. There must be traffic. Well, guys, let me tell you, you get off onto these roads that are literally the width of like a single lane road, but they're for 2 lanes. And so you got to hug the left-hand side, but it's hard to do because you're driving from the right-hand side. And the left-hand side is essentially stone wall the entire time. And there are like tour buses and garbage trucks and ambulances coming the opposite direction from you. So you're wanting to inch over to the left, but you have no idea how close you are to the wall on the left because you're driving from the right. Going around some of these curves and turns, there had to have been at least 4 times. I'm white-knuckling it, and I'm like, it's over. That's it. It's over. But we got there, and...
What kind of car was it, by the way?
Oh, that's the other thing. Here's the number one thing that I can suggest to anybody. If you are going to rent a car there, absolutely rent a compact car. They gave me an SUV. Okay? Because I wanted an automatic. I didn't want to have to stick. I know how to drive a stick, but I didn't want to have to drive a stick with my left hand. So I asked for an automatic, and the only automatic they had was an SUV. So I'm driving the widest car possible, right?
You're drifting.
Total disaster. They're at least and the day before that, we did a tour of Trinity College and the Book of Kells, which was very powerful. To see the Book of Kells, which is a 9th century, biblical interpretation book, was very, very powerful. But there was another couple on the tour with us from Wyoming, mind you, and they had done the drive to the cliff. I know the guy and I, we talked about the Pokes. I'm like, what's going on? But they had done the drive to the cliffs the day before, and the guy was like, I've never been more tested in our relationship the entire time than when I was trying to drive and she was sitting past you trying to navigate, and he's like, we were screaming, and I'm white-knuckling, and I kind of laughed about it, and then the next day I'm like, yeah, I get it. Then we went, over the weekend, we went to Scotland. I cannot recommend, suggest, and thumbs up Scotland enough. I thought Edinburgh, Scotland was beautiful. The people were fabulous. It was clean. It was efficient, like all right there. It was historic. I loved everything about it. Every person that we met was fabulous.
Especially the gas stations.
So what's that?
Especially the gas stations.
The gas stations. Yeah, well, now in Edinburgh, unfortunately, the gas stations didn't have the huge like Starbucks level cafe in them. I will say that. But I loved everything about it. But we got there, and the cabbie that picks us up and is driving us to the hotel points out, he says, well, tonight is a huge event. 72,000 people sold out in that stadium. Well, it was the international rugby. It was a friendly.
Yeah, that was going to be my guess. Would have been rugby.
It was a friendly, but it was international rugby between Scotland and Fiji. Now, the Fiji national team was staying in our hotel. So we get to the hotel, and the Fiji national team's there. And, I mean, there's, like, fans. I mean, it's crazy. So I asked somebody in the hotel, hey, what's good to do around here? And they said, oh, well, there's a viewing party for this match. The match is in the stadium, kind of, outside of downtown. But they put up like a 20-foot by 20-foot screen, just like they would do in any major city for like Game 7.
Yeah.
1,000 people, probably, right? And it just struck me as funny about the relativity of sport, because I'm watching this match, and there was a guy for Scotland who had bounced back and off injury, and he scored a, whatever they call it, a goal, touchdown, whatever. And, I mean, it was like, and to these people, it was the equivalent of Steph Curry doing the good night shot, right? And I'm like, it's amazing that there are other parts of the world, notably where I live, where none of these people all could walk through Monument Circle and no one would know who they are, but they were absolute rock stars there, right?
The power of sport, man. It's a beautiful thing.
So Jeremiah Johnson's going to join us at the top of the hour, but before he does, I will present to you guys your lovely return gifts that I brought back for you from my trip to Ireland and Scotland. And I will simply say, Edinburgh in particular, loved everything about it, and enjoyed watching the rugby match and a big soccer match between Celtic and somebody else, Eddie.
Football, and that's Jimmy.
Football, or Jimmy. Celtic, and who's the other one from Edinburgh? I don't know, but people were going crazy
Celtic's
over
the big
it.
one, but yes, yeah.
And Celtic, they're out of Glasgow, and they won 4-0, and everybody went crazy.
No.
0-4, that's right. It was level for a bit. I will give you guys your gifts, and then JJ will join us next. Join us about 5 minutes from now. Before we do that, a couple of souvenirs for you guys here.
Ooh.
Now, one of them comes with a disclaimer. Actually, now 2 disclaimers.
Uh-oh.
Okay? When I was leaving for the trip, Jimmy, I asked what you wanted, and you gave a specific request, which was what?
I said if you could find something from one of the national teams, either Scotland or Ireland, that would be cool.
You said Ireland, right?
Yes. Yeah, either one.
I didn't look as heavily for that in Ireland, but we were kind of staying in a shopping area. But the one that I saw was very clad in, and I know that this is how they do it, but
Sure.
in the sponsorship stuff, right?
Sure.
And maybe this one is as well. I don't know. You said what size? What size is that you're wearing?
I think it's an XL, I believe.
Okay. So when I went to the store, and I couldn't totally understand the guy because his accent was so thick, but when we went to Edinburgh, Scotland,
Sure.
is when I really started looking for stuff. And so I asked the guy, I asked your size, you told me, and then the guy said, I'd run a bit smaller, snugger. I'm like, excuse me? And Shannon's like, I think he said they run small and they can be snug. And I'm like, okay. So,
By the way, how lost would you have been in terms of the dialect without Shannon? Like, would that have been a
yeah, I mean, it was
struggle for you?
literally all of it. I'm like, can you slow down for a second? People were unbelievably friendly. So I feel bad because it looks like you already have one. And this is a 2XL, so you'll have to shrink it. But here you go. So that is the.
Thank you.
That's a
awesome.
kit, I
Nice
believe.
left-handed fastball there.
You like that?
Yeah.
This is a kit of the
Can you hold up to the
Scotland
camera,
national
Jimmy?
team, correct?
Indeed, it is. It is.
So
indeed.
this is just like what, the away version of what you were wearing?
Well, so this one again, I bought for $10 on eBay because it was made in 2006. But this is new.
Okay.
This is legit. This is awesome.
Now,
Thank you.
also, just knowing that, obviously, that, you're going through the situation now with the little one at home, and
Sure.
it's harder to get sleep and that kind of thing. So for that reason, I saw this candy and thought that you probably could relate to it. I have no idea what this candy is, but here you go. I thought that candy would be very fitting for you in your current situation.
Would you like me to share that with you?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
okay, nice. There we go.
These are blue raspberry. What are they called
I
exactly?
believe they're called Blue Balls Chewy Bonbons.
Yeah,
I believe
blue
is the name
balls.
there. Oh, thank
okay,
you.
there you go.
Nice.
Enjoy that. Now, also, of course, it goes without saying that since you have a little one,
Sure.
My favorite animal is a cow, and I have a stuffed cow that was given to me when I was an infant, right?
Sure.
By a friend of the family, I think. And since I was in Scotland, I only saw this once on the countryside, but I figured that the little
wow.
guy could at least use himself.
That's very kind
his
of you,
first
Jake.
stuffed animal.
Thank
so
you
there
very
go.
much.
That is a stuffed sheep. Now, Eddie, just so you know, and you might have to launder this, because I mentioned that the rugby team was hosting Fiji, and it was a huge event, right?
Yes, sir.
And I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be one of the people. I had texted you and asked your shirt size, and you told me what?
I think it's a 2X, just to be
Correct.
safe.
Just to be safe. Which is handy because we went to the bars to watch this match and get along with everybody. So I just went ahead and wore your shirt the entire time so that I fit in, and then took it off and put it back in the bag. So you'll want to wash it. And
Does it smell like Jake Query? Is that what you're
this is a
saying?
2X. This smells like some sort of a cologne probably and week-long stench. But there you go. That is an official Scotland rugby.
You wore it
Kit.
with the tags on it?
I did. I just tucked them in.
It's impressive.
This is awesome.
Thank you, sir.
And then
Thank you very
also,
much.
I basically got this as a group effort. I just was kind of curious about it more than anything else, and it's probably absolutely awful, but I'll give it to Eddie because of his penchant for it. They're not watermelon flavor, but those are Sour Patch Cola flavored
cola.
gummies.
Interesting.
I have no idea what Sour Patch Kid gummies that are supposed to, I guess sour cola. What would a sour cola be? Do we know?
Maybe you mixed Sour Patch Kids with a Diet Coke.
Probably. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or Blue Balls.
Very well.
Blue
could
balls
be.
with Coke,
yeah,
right?
blue raspberry.
Are you going to try one of your Blue Balls and let us know how they are?
I will indeed.
Actually, the
It's
kid,
labeled. By the way, it's labeled as a tongue painter, which you can take that however you want. But I assume my tongue's going to turn blue here. But that's
you can actually make your own joke that you don't have one without the other, right? I mean, come on, let's be real here.
Thank you, Jake, very much. No, this is awesome. These are Chance gonna love this. I love the jersey.
I guess it's is it a sheep?
I think it's a sheep. I was gonna say cow, but it's definitely sheep.
Yeah,
But
it's an Irish sheep.
a lot of Irish heritage in the Cook family. This is
there?
sick. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Top of the morning to you.
Thank you very much.
Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so, on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. And it is now, Eddie, you tell me the name of the television network now because I get confused. I got to write this down.
FanDuel Sports Network.
The FanDuel Sports Network, okay? The FanDuel Sports Network is where, of course, you find Jeremiah Johnson doing his sideline work for the Pacers television broadcast tonight. The Orlando Magic in town. And, JJ, I will begin by simply saying this. I thought a year ago Orlando was one of those teams that while they may not in the standings have been where Indiana was, they were obviously good. I know you don't have Banchero out there, which is a change for Orlando, but just from a position standpoint, they seem to have length and I think create really tough matchups for Indiana. Would you agree with that assessment?
I do agree, and one of the things they do well is they're the kind of team that did cause the Pacers challenges a season ago because they play such good defense. So they are one of the few teams that was capable of maybe getting it into a half-court game against the Pacers, of making it hard on Indiana to score, even when they had so much success. And actually, to your point about maybe not the same in the standings, they actually were exactly the same in the standings, had the same record in the regular season, and won a tiebreaker because they had 2 wins against the Pacers compared to just 1 for Indiana in the head-to-head. So there are a lot of similarities between these two teams. We pointed those out last Monday. They played a close competitive game. The difference, though, was Paolo Banchero, and he had 50 points, and he won't be available for Orlando tonight. So that should, along with the home court advantage, you would think tilt the advantage to the home team.
Jeremiah, what have you seen notably on Monday? Let's talk about Tyrese Halliburton's start to the season. And I think there was some curiosity, I'll use the word concern, from the way last year, and I know that he had the injury, and it seemed like that was carrying over to this year just in terms of a hesitation of getting things going offensively. What was different for him Monday night when he had kind of a breakthrough night?
He was attacking a little bit more, but I was real impressed by the fact that the numbers he put up and really the extra emphasis of getting to the basket never felt forced. Sometimes when you've been struggling with your outside shot, you're told you've got to attack the basket, and maybe you go out of your way to just pass up the outside shots and only go inside. He still got a number of three-point attempts off, but he was perfect inside the arc. And, he was creating for his teammates. That's what you want. You don't want to see him so focused on getting that shot going and have it be a detriment to his assist game. So really over the last 4 games, 10, 12, 11, 12 assists, that's what you saw all of last season. I think the outside shot will continue to improve, but from a scoring perspective, he's back a little bit where he was. Just look at since the Knicks game, 22, 19, 17, 11, 25. So maybe not what you remember from November and December, but closer to what you've come to expect. And again, Rick Carlisle brought up a really good point after the game on Monday. When he was doing a lot of those things in November and December, it was a different team, but Pascal Siakam was not on the court. So by nature, Tyrese is not going to get as many shots, but maybe you would think some of those looks will be better and defenses won't be focused on him as much as they were when they were trying to take him away. So I just saw an aggressive Tyrese Halliburton, but again, not forcing it too much, not trying too hard to just get to the basket. If it was there, he drove, and if he drove and someone collapsed down, then he continued to find an open teammate. They did a really good job of driving and kicking, driving and dishing, maybe the opposite block, and even getting to the free throw line is something that you want to see, and he did that 6 attempts on Monday, 6 attempts on Friday in New Orleans.
Same question, Benedict Mathurin.
Well, Benedict Mathurin has been probably, I would say, the second best pacer at the start of this season. Pascal Siakam's been so consistent and reliable, and that's what you would expect. But I took note early in the game that Luka Doncic was his matchup, and one time he did, get off of his feet on a Luka Doncic pump fake and fouled him. But he really embraced that opportunity and really held his own. And then late in the game was going at Doncic, which that's what everyone tries to do late in the game. You want to isolate. You want to go at him because as good as he is offensively, he's not a good defender. And I love just the enthusiasm, the confidence, the shot that he hit in the corner, maybe with some words afterwards. I loved watching it. And you saw how important he can be late in games. He's starting due to the injuries right now, but I don't think he's going to let up on that opportunity after he gets a chance to do this here for a couple of weeks.
Jeremiah Johnson of FanDuel Sports Network with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. JJ, I fully assume them to do something over the coming months to address the lack of depth now at the center position, but you mentioned Benedict Mathurin and the conversation for him someday being the full-time starter. With the injuries that have piled up and the rotation kind of shrinking because of it, when they get Nesmith back, what do you think the current construction of the roster is going to dictate for Benedict Mathurin? Do you think it's going to dictate him as a necessity to be that sixth man that he's been for the last year and a half, or is there further room for growth to him to get into the starting lineup?
I would anticipate that he's being told this is an opportunity now to start, and if it works out, there's no reason for him to let up on that. You want to have a good sixth man, but I would say this is a team full of sixth men, and no matter who comes off the bench, if he's anchoring the second unit or if he's starting, you've got good guys that can come in and really outscore the opposition's second unit. So I think he probably views this as an opportunity. I would say that probably internally it may not be as big of a deal as to who gets the name called for starting lineups as to who's maybe on the court at the end. And even in the first 4 games, there were a number of times he was on the court late. Now, there were some times he did not have as good of a game. I mean, just because he started out good against Detroit, then didn't have a good outing against the Knicks, and has been a little bit up and down. You're going to continue to see, maybe a little bit of inconsistency, and that's where Rick Carlisle, assuming no one else gets hurt, he'll have some options, and that's what you want to have. But I don't discount the importance of Aaron Nesmith and what he does. When he comes back, there will be minutes for Aaron Nesmith. It'll just be a little bit up in the air as to what the rotation might look like.
I know rosters and front offices are constantly tinkering and evaluating every position where they can upgrade. Certainly, Chad Buchanan and Kevin Pritchard have done that. But how much is that timeline sped up knowing the Achilles injuries you've had to Jackson, to Wiseman, and knowing that over the course of an 82-game season, you really need that consistent depth, not just to succeed, but to have guys that are able to give your starters breaks and ease some of the tension there?
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy, you've always got to be looking at what might happen, and then they can survive right now with Miles Turner healthy, but there's going to be a game or a moment where maybe he has a tweak or he has to miss a game or two, and that's where you're really in trouble without either Wiseman or Jackson. So it is a little bit of a luxury that they have that open roster spot, but there are still some limitations, I think, probably with the salary cap and all those things of to when you can bring someone in. You're looking at a team tonight, Orlando doesn't have Wendell Carter Jr., and they don't have Paolo Banchero. Now, they're not season-ending injuries, but for the short term, they're going to be a little bit smaller. Same could be said for Charlotte. Their 2 centers are out. So, it's almost a game-by-game basis of how they attack the opponents while not having that true backup center. But Obi Toppin can play some backup 5, and they're going to play some teams that have similar lack of size in their second unit. So I think you just got to go maybe week by week, look at who you're playing, see how you can survive. But Rick Carlisle was pretty honest before the game when Dustin DePierre asked him that, they're talking about things, they're looking into things. So common sense would say you've got an open roster spot, you've got a need to probably pick up another big at some point. You just don't know when and who.
JJ, my thought is, as I watch without Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson in there now, I look at like an Andre Drummond, and I realize that Andre Drummond now is like, I think he's like a year behind me, right, in age. But like big space eating, not necessarily scoring, but just space eating kind of attitude big guys, right? And I feel like that's been what this franchise has needed. And then I have to remind myself that I think maybe I'm thinking in an antiquated sense, and that those players are not as critical in today's NBA as they once were. Are they not as critical in today's NBA, or am I just thinking that the Pacers, that it would be critical simply because they don't have one?
It goes in cycles. I would say it's probably more critical now. Critical is probably not the right word. It's better to have a guy like that now than maybe a few years ago. There was a pace and space era, and the game is slowing down just a little bit. Rick Carlisle has mentioned numerous times the coaches' meetings with the officials in the offseason and how they showed them plays that would not be called foul. So that would tend to point towards your theory that you need that physical center, the guy that can provide a little contact, maybe doesn't get the foul. But what I would also say is rebounding is still important no matter what pace the game is being played at, and that's been a struggle at times for the Pacers. It's a point of emphasis, and Rick Carlisle even said it on Monday. When they out-rebound the opponent, they have a win. There's 3 wins. 4 games they've lost, they got out-rebounded. And so you would think a player like you're speaking of would be able to help on the glass. What you don't want it to be a detriment of is the pace, because that's what makes this team so good. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 with a 15-man roster, if you had everyone healthy, you definitely would just love to have a guy like that, but you have to place your priorities with what best suits your team. So I think it'd be great to have a guy like that. I think it's more important now than 5 years ago, 4 years ago, but maybe not as important as the era you might be thinking of with the Davis brothers and Rick Smith.
Give me the player that has either from a positive standpoint or, well, you know what? I'll take that back. Give me the player that to this point you kind of feel like you need to go up on the back of them and twist the wind up on the toy just a little bit more because they just haven't gotten off to the start that you thought they would.
It's a good question. I mean, Tyrese Halliburton maybe would be the early answer, but I think he's going to be fine, and I think we and everyone around the league looks to him to certain numbers in play. And so, the first week was a little bit concerning, but I think everything's fine right now. Aaron Nesmith, I'll bring him up just because his numbers aren't going to be necessarily what you look at the end of the game. It's the intangibles, it's the physicality, and they'll miss him for as long as he is out. I don't think it's going to be too long, but hard to know right now. He was in a boot on Monday. But maybe just a little more impact. He was having his best game in New Orleans when he stepped on Willie Green and then, re-injured that ankle a little bit. And so probably just if Aaron Nesmith is out there, you almost need a little bit more of a catch-and-shoot three-point threat on the floor with that current starting lineup. And so as much as he's valued for his physicality and his defense, I suppose that's something that, December, January, I just want him to be able to be that guy because you might be just a little lacking in the true three-point shooting threats on this roster compared to maybe some other teams around the league or maybe even what you were last season, let's say when you started and you had Buddy Hield running around.
Yeah, we talked about Buddy Hield, the level of just space spread, right? I mean, maybe, and to your point, maybe now it is a little bit more of a slow down game and you don't go with that furious pace of finding openness so quickly like Buddy Hield could do because he was remarkable at his ability to move from one spot to the other on the floor so quickly. But it does seem like they could still use somebody that spreads things out a little bit to get them going. But we'll see what happens tonight. Orlando Magic in town. Jeremiah Johnson, of course, will be working it on the FanDuel Sports Network. Am I saying that right? I'm still getting used to it.
You are correct. No errors there, and we haven't slipped up and said any incorrect names.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to jinx you, Jeremiah, but as somebody who's had 27 jobs and been fired from 26, it gets tough after a while, right?
We'll do our best. I appreciate the time, and welcome back home, Jake.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jeremiah. Jeremiah Johnson on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. It is good to be home.
Are you okay over there? You're a little squirmish.
Huh?
You're a little squirmy over there.
Am I squirmy?
Yeah, I mean, you're just all over the place. Are you okay?
Oh, it's this chair. I must be in Andy's chair. Must be what happens when you sit in. My body clock's a little off, right?
That would be fair, given the amount of travel you've
It's
done in the
easier
last
coming
48
back,
hours.
though. Going
Yeah,
over there is tough
yeah.
because you land and you feel like you should be going to bed and you're just starting the day. It's the other way around, right?
Yes.
So last night was weird.
You probably went to bed the earliest you've gone to bed in years in American
Correct.
soil when you got home.
That's right, because it was to my body, it was like 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'd been up for 22 hours or something. But tonight's game is interesting because I really felt like a year ago Orlando was that one team, and it's a little bit hard now without, as I mentioned, without Paolo Banchero out there. But the length of Orlando just seemed to give the Pacers fits a year ago, Jimmy. It just seemed to give them fits, right?
And they are closer in terms of what the national conversation has been around the Orlando Magic of being in the mix of taking a leap forward. And I think a lot of people thought maybe last year and certainly this year could be the year for them. It's a larger, and I know it's so early, but it's a larger fascination for me with the Eastern Conference because you have the Cavaliers who are undefeated right now and Boston's right there with them. After that, it's basically, granted, some have played a couple more games than others, but it's basically a 10-way tie for the 3 seed right now in the East. Like, it's super early, but you have a bunch of teams that are either at 500 or below 500 between the Miami Heat and the Detroit Pistons in the 10 spot right now. So, again, all that's going to change. There will be separation, but through almost 10 games now, it is just as either parity-stricken or health-wise stricken that teams are battling, the Pacers included right now, to find any solid footing. And that's before we even get to the NBA Cup. Like we talked about yesterday with Scott Agnes, I don't know where the importance from a health standpoint and from a acquisition standpoint, the NBA Cup is for teams because the ultimate prize is the Larry O'Brien Trophy and getting to the postseason. But this is a vehicle that the NBA is going to continue to push. I've been a big fan of it. Clearly, the city was because we got to enjoy a run to the NBA Cup final last year. But
that's the in-season tournament,
correct,
right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
The NBA
to
Cup,
clarify
yes.
that, yes.
The Emirates NBA Cup.
They have rebranded now as the Emirates NBA Cup, formerly the in-season tournament.
No, wait a minute. Emirates is an airline, right?
That is correct.
Do they fly in the U.S.?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
That seems to be.
I think so, but I would assume
it's kind of like Husky chocolate.
I bet in bigger airports,
Yes.
like in New York.
Remember when Husky Chocolate was sponsoring Marcus Erickson, and then everybody found out for like 3 years it wasn't available in the U.S. And I thought, well, that's an interesting strategy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
I would assume in major cities they have air.
You would certainly internationally, right? You would think that
Right.
you fly. It does fly to 11 U.S. cities: Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, L.A., Miami, New York. Yeah, okay.
There you go.
Newark, Orlando, San Francisco, and Seattle. But it's based out of where?
It's
United Arab Emirates, I would assume.
Yes, yeah, Dubai, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a bold strategy, right? You got to tap into that audience that's routinely NBA fans that are flying from Boston to Dubai on a regular basis.
They sponsor the officials, the referees.
That's
They
right.
did. Yeah, you saw a lot of that. I mean, you've seen it in, as you would assume, because of their base. You've seen it a ton in soccer the last 5 or 10 years.
Totally,
As
yeah.
well.
That's
I get it.
football.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you, Eddie.
Uh-huh. By the way, there is one player that has me concerned. Okay?
All right.
Sometimes I speak things into existence. Sometimes I mention things and I throw something out there. I just throw it in. I think I told you about the time that I flew on a red eye once from Long Beach, and just as we were about to take off, there was an empty seat next to me, and this kid sat down and splashed me with something like patchouli or something. And I'm like, what is that? And he goes, don't worry, it's those are the tears of 1,000 dead kings. And I knew then that I was in for a long
Can you
haul.
define kid for me there? Because depending on the age, that's rather disturbing.
He was probably 22.
Okay.
And I was like 45 at the time. So I had a 4-hour red eye, which I was hoping to get some sleep, and instead listened to this guy who'd just gotten back from some hippie commune cult in Santa Cruz telling me about like the, aliens and the whole deal. But one of the things he talked about was the global conscious, where he's like, have you ever had a thought and you throw it into the global conscious and then somebody else steals it? And I'm like, all the time. Like having a cologne that smells like the beach and then Calvin Klein takes it, right? All the time.
We're a watermelon gummy offering away from this being Eddie Garrison that you actually ran into on the plane. You just didn't know it
That
was
is
him.
exactly correct. So this guy was telling me about one's ability to throw something into the global conscious and then other people pick it off and it comes into reality.
Oh, that's your life.
And totally. And there is something that on this program, like a week and a half ago, I threw out there.
Why not, right?
Correct. Trademark, by the way. Why not Indiana's trademark?
Patent pending?
Meeting with attorney this week. Thank you. Big check cut.
Jimmy gets that reference.
Indeed.
So here's the thing. I threw something out there regarding an athlete that we haven't talked about yet today. And lo and behold, I think it's coming to fruition before our very eyes. And it's going to be a discussion for a long time in this town. You guys stew on it and see if you can tell me who it is. I don't know, maybe a week and a half ago, when we were just sitting here and I had a random non-insomnia-related brain dropping, and I threw this out there. I just said, which player do you think we're going to have a definitive answer on their future first? Anthony Richardson or Jarris Walker? And at the time, it seemed like just kind of a fleeting, passing brain dropping that, then after that we would never know that I even said it. And then all of it, literally within, 3 or 4 days, we obviously know what happened with Anthony Richardson. Now, that's not to say that the move with him is definitive, although, as I'm sure you guys have talked about for the last week, the precedent would say that it is, because it is, there have been many, many articles and research things done since talking about players that are drafted inside of the top 5 that are then benched by the franchise that drafted them, and the rarity of that player then coming back and going on to success with said franchise. Now, if he's out for, say, 2 or 3 games and then comes back, that's a little bit different. If he's benched for the rest of the year, I think that's a totally different thing. I think if he bounces back if Anthony Richardson is back within a game or two, then I think we absolutely can legitimately question whether or not it was strictly a health issue that led him to be out for a couple of weeks and they didn't want to mention it. I think that's totally in play.
Is there a length of time, whether it's health, whether it's discipline, is there a number of games where that conversation goes away? Or like if that's the goal the Colts were trying to achieve, that it becomes a moot point because, well, you could cover it up as saying, oh, it was just 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, but if he's hurt, you have to put it on the injury report.
Theoretically.
I think, Jake, and again, since you weren't here, I want your thoughts on this. I'm still convinced it was disciplinary and that they're just not publicly saying it because of saving
possible.
face.
Well, I listen, and I didn't want to get too into it because I assume that it's a topic that has been widely discussed and whatever. With that said, the 2 things that I don't think you can rule out, and I don't know that we'll ever know for certain, that I will assure you of this, okay? This is going to be just like the Trent Richardson situation, where Trent Richardson, they trade for Trent Richardson, and it is a complete bust, and it goes nowhere. And then after time, then the truth kind of comes out, and you find out more, and you see, he does some interviews, and you hear from other people that he had a lot going on with his home life, and, he didn't get along with Grigson, and Ryan Grigson said, like, you're dead to me or something allegedly, according to Richardson. I'm not saying that's fact. But I think there was a lot more going on non-football related. Or the Andrew Luck situation, with the snowboarding thing. And then you find out that there was, in the end, once the dust all settles, all the stuff that we were told that we were making stuff up, turns out to be accurate, right? Sometime down the road, that's going to happen in this situation. We're going to find out the definitive answer. And I think that one of those potential definitive answers is that the Colts had major issue with the lack of maturity of Anthony Richardson. And I don't mean lack of maturity like he's making fart noises with his armpits. And I don't mean lack of maturity like he's staying out at clubs until 3 o'clock in the morning. But I just think lack of maturity of the total dedication and understanding towards being a starting quarterback in the NFL and knowing that you've got to be the first person in the building and the last person out every single day. And that players are looking to you to see how much you're doing in terms of the leadership and the guidance of the franchise and what other players expect from that. And, guys like Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson who are going in and they're playing through injury and they're doing other such things, the understanding or the expectation they have that you are going to be going through everything. When you do a film session, you do it 3 times. Not twice, 3. Not 3, 4. Whatever. That when it comes to throwing, and again, I know that I always fall back on this era, but it's because it's the standard in this town and in this franchise. It's the standard. And the one story that I always go back to when it comes to quarterback leadership is before they played the Super Bowl in Miami, the story that Jeff Saturday tells of them leaving practice, and as they're walking off the practice field, Manning is like you and I are going over here. And everybody else is leaving. The day's done. The work day's over with. They're punching the time clock. And then Manning and Jeff Saturday go over, and he's got a huge bucket full of water and 100 footballs or 10 footballs or whatever it was. And he says to Jeff Saturday, okay, we're going to take all these footballs and dunk them in this water until it's saturated, and we're just going to continue snapping, and you're going to snap me these dripping wet footballs. Because he'd looked at the forecast and knew what the forecast was in the Super Bowl. That sort of foresight and dedication, but more so commitment, little things like that, that's a maturity. That's an understanding. That's a leadership. And I don't think that Anthony Richardson was bringing that to the table. I'm not saying that he was coming in and, being a prankster all the time. I mean, he wasn't like a Lance Stevenson level of immaturity, but just a lack of dedication or understanding, almost just naive to the understanding and commitment. I think that's what we're going to find out was the biggest overriding factor here, and that is something that time takes care of, one would think. Jarris Walker is the other half of that equation I threw out, and I really did think that I was probably being too critical or too unfair because, again, go by precedent, which is what I always do with franchises. If you go by precedent, the precedent dictates with the Pacers that there are players that have been drafted that have sat for a year, maybe even two, and then been really good players that once they got their number was called and they got into the rotation, you saw what they could do. Jarris Walker is not void of opportunity. He's been given chance on the court. And I'm not saying he's terrible and looks like a Keystone Cop out there, but he also is not. There's no impact, really. More often than not, he plays 13, 15 minutes, and if you went to the game or you watched the game after the fact, you're like, did Jarris Walker play tonight? And so that's one of them that I wonder. With Richardson, we still don't have an answer, but we at least know that it is being that the test is being put out there. And Mr. Hand has handed out the sheet, and everybody smelled the ditto paper, right?
Yeah.
And yet,
what are you people on dope?
And yet, with Jarris Walker, you almost forget that he's in the classroom. And at some point, he's going to have to start. We still don't know when that is. I don't know when it is that we then say definitively that we know who he is. But it feels to me like we're kind of in the midst of figuring out that maybe we're just going to find out he's just a guy, right?
I discussed this
Which
a
is
little
fine,
bit.
except for where he was drafted.
Right. And then that's the story of every player's career. At some point, the area where you're drafted not performing to that level or above follows you. Doesn't matter if you're the number 1 overall pick or if you're a lottery pick. That label will follow you if you underperform. I brought this up yesterday, and it's just a comparison example because he's been in the league for so long. And granted, he performed well as a rookie. He made an all-rookie second team and was a driving force for the Pacers out of the gate. But Miles Turner's only 28 years old, and he's been in the league almost 10 seasons. And he is a testament to a Pacers front office that is willing to take younger players and give them time to grow and develop into the role they need to be. And I will admit, I am being very optimistic with this observation because we live in a world where we need everything right now, and pressure is always on groups to perform and front offices to deliver contention and championships and all that. But the Pacers have shown an ability to take younger players, and on the outside, we might look at it and say there's no progress being made, but they're willing to give time to grow. There might be a moment where this winds up being a moot point I'm bringing up, and Walker is just a guy, and he was a miss for where the Pacers drafted him, but I'm still clinging to the fact that he's still only 21 years old. He's a younger player in a league where there's still everything in front of him. Do I think he's going to wind up being the franchise-altering piece that maybe they hoped he could be? No, I would tend to side with you on that, Jake. But he's still young enough and still in the perfect environment to learn and grow where I think there's a solid future still on the table for him as a Pacer.
The thing that's weird about him to me is the fact that I still don't know what that role is, though. Like, is
Correct,
he a small forward? Is he a power forward? Is he a shooter? Like, what exactly?
Yeah.
Is he feels a little bit like, going on the real way back here, like George McLeod. Like, they drafted George McLeod, and they're like, he's going to be a point guard. And he was kind of a bust. He was the last top 10 pick before Jarris Walker, mind you, right? And then, I think that's right. And then you turn around, Matherin. Sorry, Matherin and then Jarris Walker. And then you turn around and he goes to Dallas and becomes a really good shooting guard. And you realize he was just miscast with his first stop. And with Jarris Walker, like, I don't know which cast he is. You know what I mean? That's the thing to me that's the most intriguing.
Last week I said it was a little bit unfair of what the coaching staff was doing to Jarris Walker and Ben Shepherd because it's one game. Jarris Walker, okay, you get 8 minutes in the first half. Ben Shepherd, you get the other 8 minutes in the second half. It's unfair to both players. You can't evaluate any of them if they're only getting 8 minutes and the rotations aren't the same either. They haven't had the same rotation from game to game. It's changed every single game. So for a guy that is 21 years old, it's hard to fit in when you're not a
when
guy
you don't know where you fit.
Yeah, that and the players around you are constantly changing.
That's
that you're
what I
playing
mean.
with.
I mean, it's hard to figure out what piece of the puzzle you are when the puzzle itself is constantly changing. That's a fair
They are
point.
in one tough spot, and I know we got to go to break, but they're in a tough spot because if you're looking at areas where the Pacers can move things, if they're trying to add depth, and you brought this up a couple weeks ago, Jake, before the injuries, Walker's a very attractive piece to other teams. And I know they have to do salary matches, but like in a world where rookie contracts are doled out in the blink of an eye and they end and then you give the big payday, he could be a piece. Would they move him? I don't know.
Well, especially if they need to acquire a big.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that they are lean there. Bob Kravitz, by the way, going to join us about 18 minutes from now. So Indiana hoping that nobody can break their stride as they go in now, finding out the rankings in the college football playoffs. It is surreal. I mean, there's no doubt. We can sit here and go on and on and on about that, but the rankings themselves, I know some were upset that Indiana found themselves at 8th, and I think that you can nitpick Indiana's strength of schedule all you want and say that that's the reason for them being 8. But the reality is that their schedule now is where, you get 2 big ones here. And I know that Michigan is not the typical Michigan, but it's still Michigan, right? And then obviously, as I mentioned before, I will scream this from the mountaintop. I'll die on this hill. Assuming they beat Purdue, and I no disrespect to Purdue, but there is not a world where anybody can envision that Indiana is not going to win the bucket game. It's a matter of how much they win the bucket game by, right?
Indeed, yeah.
So in that situation, if they beat Ohio State, they're in. They put themselves in that position now at 9-0. Let's say they trip up at Michigan against Michigan, and I forget, is that game in Ann Arbor or Bloomington?
It's at home.
That is here.
Yeah,
Memorial.
So I mean, they're going to beat Michigan, right? But even if they don't. Even if they stub their toe, Michigan comes in and beats them. I mean, my God, Indiana's scoring 40 points a game, right? So let's say that Michigan beats them 45-41. If they go into Ohio State and they beat the Buckeyes in Columbus, which I think they can do, then now you find they're right back in the mix. I mean, I'm not even saying that losing to Michigan would drop them out of that 12, but because if you look at it, who's right there, 13 through 15 for SMU, Texas A&M, and LSU. LSU's got 2 losses. A&M's got 2 losses. And SMU, I mean, they're in the ACC. They're new. Is SMU really like jumping out at people like, man, they got to be? Although I'm sure SMU fans are having the same conversation, right? But I don't know that SMU, if you look at their schedule, what's SMU's best win?
At Louisville?
Yeah, I mean, okay. It's okay. BYU, they lost to, and BYU's in the mix. So, and it was close, don't get me wrong, but still, I don't know that SMU is jumping out and emphatically. I think Indiana wins a tiebreaker between Indiana and SMU is what I'm getting at, right?
I mean, it all depends on how many losses they have at that stage.
But SMU at this point, if you look at SMU's remaining schedule, they don't really have anything to get them over the Boston College, Virginia, and Cal. So there's nothing on SMU's schedule that if they hold serve here that pushes them. In fact, if they had somebody left on their schedule that was really good, right, and you go to it and you go, okay, that's a huge win, but they don't have that. Indiana does.
They can't get the auto bid from the conference? Are they in play for that? For the conference championship game?
It's top 4, so it would depend on where they rank amongst the rest of...
Well, Miami would get it, right?
I was just saying, I didn't know if they were in play for the conference championship game. That would be the only avenue.
You're
talking
about SMU, yeah.
I think,
yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess you're right. It would be Miami, right?
I think Indiana's buffer window to get in, and to be clear, they're solidly in right now. It's 1 loss or bust. If you, let's say that, and the tie breaks are really weird, so I might be taking us down a scenario that couldn't actually happen. Let's say they made it to the Big Ten championship game with 1 loss, and that would require a couple of 2 losses to be stacked in the Big Ten because Indiana doesn't have a ton of the tie breaks. Like the tie break would basically be since they haven't played Oregon or they haven't played Penn State, I think it comes down to strength of schedule or common opponents record, and they would likely lag behind there. So if you're Indiana, you're hoping 1 loss or better, and that's enough to get you in, regardless if you're in the Big Ten championship game or not.
Listen, for Indiana, the thing that I most like about them, and that I think would be that it's fascinating to me, is if you are Ohio State or you're Michigan and you're looking at it, what's the key to beating Indiana? What's the weakness you expose? Who knows, right? They can run the ball. They're efficient throwing the ball. If you let them get an early lead in the second or third quarter, they just continue to hammer at you.
Their defense constantly hunts the ball. They're always tackling in space. I mean, your only hope if you're Michigan, and this is probably an edge for Ohio State as well, is you could get them off to a slow start and you can match them pound for pound offensively. I don't think Michigan can do that. Ohio State certainly on paper could. But again, you only lose to Ohio State if that's your only loss on the season, you're going to the playoff.
There's no question. Unless they got beat, this isn't going to happen. I guess if they went to Columbus and they get beat 56-3, you know what I mean? But that's not going to happen. I mean, they may lose. They might lose to Ohio State, but
Eddie, you'd seen a look-ahead spread on that game, right?
2 touchdowns.
For Ohio State, and
Yes,
I haven't
sir.
been able to find it since then because generally a lot of the books will take off the next week once we get into. But yeah, I would too. Yeah, I would scoop the 14 they would get as dogs and hope that they cover or maybe win outright. But yeah, look,
That's DAWG, right, Jimmy?
indeed this is the reality of Indiana's situation. While I could have an argument and fully understand about them being behind Tennessee or being behind Penn State as an undefeated team that. You only have to play the games on your schedule. That's not their fault. They've blown everybody out. They've covered the number every game. They've been making statements every week. You stumble to only Ohio State, or as Jake outlined, you lose to Michigan, then beat Ohio State. A one-loss Indiana team gets in the playoff.
no question.
Because of the Power 5 conference they come from and because of what they've done this season, they're in. Anything worse than that, then you start to open the door where the committee could look at a blanket SEC school like LSU and say, well, that's a brand. Sorry, Indiana, night-night.
How about this one? You ready?
Okay.
Which happens first? Anthony Richardson is reinserted as a Colts starting quarterback, or Ryan Walters is relieved of his job?
Richardson's reinstalled.
Okay. So you think that happens by the end of the month?
I've had this joking conversation with executive producer of this very show, Todd Meyer, that Indiana beats Purdue by 50 and they leave Ryan Walters in Martinsville. So I don't know if that's really where Purdue's MO is, but rivalry games matter regardless of how bad your season is. And if you get thwarted by Indiana when...
What about Waverly?
Wherever.
Is Waverly north or south of Martinsville?
I do not know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know.
But he doesn't make the ride home is what you're saying, right?
Correct.
Okay, fair enough.
Stop
Bob
at
Kravitz,
County
by the
Line
way,
Road.
Going to join us next. Hey, joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, Bob Kravitz. Of course, you can read his column, bobkravitz.com. He gives out his dopey report card with the Colts. And also a lot to talk about with Indiana football and the Pacers in play as well. But we will begin with the Colts themselves. Bob, I'll begin with this. Trade deadline came and went. Not that that's – the NFL trade line is different than the NBA trade deadline.
Right.
But would the Colts have been more aggressive? The fact that they didn't make a move, does that lead you to believe that they believe that this year is not in the direction or the timetable or goal that they thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year?
I honestly thought that if they had won that game against Minnesota, they might have been a little more aggressive, maybe go after a David Njoku from the Cleveland Browns or somebody like that. I think losing that game, I don't know if it changed the organizational philosophy about this season, but they foolishly seem to believe that they can do something with Joe Flacco behind center, and for the life of me, I don't see it. I really, not to go all JMV on you, but I think this Buffalo game is an absolute must-win game for them to just, stay in the conversation for the AFC South.
Well, and also, Bob, I'll tell you what's interesting, and you tell me if this is, you think, of factor to them, because fans are fickle. I get it. That's why they're called fans. But I do a thing after each game where I simply say, give me 3 words or less that describe your feeling on the Colts at this point in the season. And this was the first time that the vast majority of replies that I got, amongst hundreds of them, were people expressing to me that they are either not renewing their season tickets or they've completely lost interest. And apathy is a very dangerous thing. Do you think that really, truly matter? Can the Colts, if you're the Colts, you can't make decisions based on that, though, right?
No, you can't. You got to do what you think is best for your team. And I don't understand what they are seeing in Joe Flacco. I mean, he had one magical 5-game run in Cleveland last year, but that was a really good Cleveland team. I mean, I believe they were 7-4 when Flacco took over and had the best defense in the league and a good running game and a lot of weapons on the outside. This team doesn't have that. They obviously have JT when you can get him going, but they don't have the pass catchers. Now you got an issue with Pittman, so we'll see. What how that's gonna play out from week to week. But no, I think you gotta you gotta stand for something. But I thought that they flinched on Anthony Richardson. They always talk about never flinching and having an approach and sticking with it. And they blew the whole damn thing up after just 6 games. So, look, if Anthony wasn't taking it seriously enough, you have conversations with him. You talk with him. You make him understand what needs to happen. If it means one game, I think the tap out was just the last straw for them. I don't believe it was the sum total of the reason why he was yanked. I don't think performance, through 10 games, his numbers are very comparable to Josh Allen, the guy he's most often compared to. So, I'm not sure what they're doing. It's an absolute mystery to me.
Bob, do you think – here's the thing. The Colts have – and I understand why. But, the Colts were the ones that told us about how Anthony Richardson, all this promise that he had and what a sponge he was and,
Right.
how eager he was to learn and how much he'd worked on his footwork and all of these things. And so it's a hard sell to tell me all that and then come back and all of a sudden we find out that he's been removed as the starter because he wasn't dedicated enough, right? I don't think he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
I think he's an immature guy. But having said all that, what is, in your opinion, what is the window of time where you can have a young person get benched at the quarterback position in the NFL and then return and still be able to get a spark before it goes too far gone and there's no coming back with it?
Right. And you look at the history of rookie quarterbacks who've been benched. They rarely come back and perform well with the original team. Usually they have to go somewhere else to get their shot. Look, the Colts after one preseason game last year gave Anthony Richardson the job. I mean, it really wasn't much of a fair fight with him and Gardner Minshew. They wanted badly to make this thing work. And at that time, they obviously thought that he was taking it seriously, that he was putting in the time, that he was coming in early and last guy out of there, that whole thing. I think with Anthony, it's a lot of it is he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And, he's 22 years old, for Christ's sake, and, he didn't play in a lot of the elite quarterback camps that they have during the summers of your high school year. He played 1 year at Florida, 13 games, didn't even throw 400 passes. You look at the NFL, there's a number, and I don't know what it is, but I was here listening to this the other day, but there's a minimum number of passes that you need to throw to really be ready for the NFL. And 393 or whatever the number was just isn't enough to get you prepared on the field or off.
Bob, do you think there's any chance that Anthony Richardson was a little bit banged up and they simply don't want to say it because there's been too much critique of Anthony Richardson always being banged up?
Well, I heard John mention that, he may not have wanted to admit or concede that he had a hip issue in the Houston game and said he was tired just to kind of, make it look like he wasn't brittle. I guess that's all possible, but based on the way the team responded to the tap out, Ryan Kelly, Shane Steichen, everybody else, I don't know if that's the case. I think he just tapped out because he was gassed.
I look at it this way, okay? And Bob Kravitz is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. I think it's tired, and I think it's boorish to just take the easy fruit and just pound on it, right? In saying that Chris Ballard should be questioned or is on the hot seat is kind of the low-hanging fruit here. However, at the trade deadline, for example, I mentioned this earlier. If you were to look and say, okay, if they wanted to get a piece, maybe they send away a third or a fifth rounder and he covets draft capital. The problem is the areas where he's hit in the draft have more often than not been at positions that are not of great significance in the NFL. Left guard,
Sure.
Linebacker, okay, great. But those aren't like game-changing type play, like positions. So, and then I just keep going back to we're too far into an administration to have to possibly do another reset. At what point does the seat become warm? And I don't mean from our standpoint. I mean from the owner's standpoint.
Oh, I think it's warm right now. I mean, look, they're putting themselves on the hot seat just by making this decision. If they had stayed with Anthony Richardson, they could have said, well, he's a young kid. He's basically in his rookie year. He's just starting to figure it out. We're going to take our lumps. In some ways, I think they put more pressure on themselves by saying, look, we're good enough. If we just add a decent quarterback who can complete 60% of his passes, we think we have a chance to win most weeks. I just don't see that. I mean, he wasn't very good against Tennessee, although they won that game in Nashville. He obviously wasn't good against Minnesota. So, I mean, the idea that this guy who's going to be 40 in January still has a little magic left, I think it's hit its expiration date. I really do. And if he struggles against Buffalo, which doesn't have a great defense, but if he struggles against Buffalo, it's going to get loud and nasty in that building. And the question is, at some point, do they bring Anthony back? And I think they have to. If this thing goes in the crapper the way I expect it to.
Do they, Bob, do they have to at this point, though, if they're going to reinsert, let me throw this at you.
Yeah.
Bob Kravitz, our guest. If they get to the point where Joe Flacco's, and we saw this in Cleveland, Joe Flacco's a donut tire. I've always said that, right? not saying his whole career, but at this point in his career, Joe Flacco's a donut tire. It's perfectly
No doubt.
sufficient to get you to the next exit, but it's not going to get you to the end destination on the interstate, right? And and maybe he's ready for the exit, right? We're starting to see blistering on the tire. If they are in a position where they have to reinsert Anthony Richardson, have they put themselves in a pickle here? Because is it critical that they not reinsert him until there are enough things around him to be able to not dent whatever fragility of his ego is maybe the wrong word, of his mental makeup is there? Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Could they further damage him is what I'm getting at.
They've screwed this thing up so thoroughly. I mean, you gotta, you can't be hard-headed. But I didn't think that things had gotten to the point with Anthony. I realized he was completing just 44% of his passes this year, but they were still a 500 team. And I just thought they pulled the plug way too early. Now, we're not here every day. We're not privy to what goes on behind the scenes. We don't know what kind of work schedule Anthony is working. So a lot of this is just conjecture and speculation at this point. But, again, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think I think at some point, once they get below 500 here by a couple of games, I just don't see any reason not to play AR and get him some of those very necessary reps.
Bob, the mental standpoint with all of this is what I can't fully move past, because I'm with you. At some point, the season is washed, and you might as well just get the reps for him if it goes the way that it looked like it was going to against Minnesota with Joe Flacco. But with a young quarterback like that, how do you manage him in that regard? Because that screams to me, look, we didn't trust you. I'm sure it was a number of different things, but we didn't trust you against the top level of competition to save the season. But hey, now that it's over, go out there, kid. Good luck to you. Like, that still adds up to me in the conversation of why, when you take the keys away, the second chance for that quarterback often comes at a different team.
Well, look, if he's not tough enough to bounce back from this, he's not the future. It's as simple as that. I mean, if he comes back, he needs to play representatively well. And I think that he's got a chance to do that. I am not giving up on this guy. But they have to make a decision here one way or the other. And to me, taking your lumps with Anthony is the way to go. And again, if they put him back there and he struggles, will it possibly hurt him in the long term? Yeah, I guess that's possible. But if it does, if this benching ruins him, then we know he wasn't the right guy in the first place.
Bob, I've been pretty clear that I'm out on Chris Ballard. I have been for some time. Next stat it's against Shane Steichen, but I'm not really there with him just yet. It goes to the larger problem, perhaps, with this Colts offense. Under Shane Steichen, the Colts are 5-5 with Anthony Richardson. They're 8-8 with other quarterbacks. They're scoring 22.9 points a game with Richardson. Minshew and Flacco's games, they're scoring 22.8. At what point is it personnel and what they're doing offensively versus the struggles over one quarterback versus another?
Well, I've said this from the very beginning. They don't have enough in the way of receivers. I've said this for 142 years. They got no tight ends. They're not getting any production out of their tight ends. Again, I thought that if they had won that game against Minnesota, they would have been well served to make a run at David Njoku from the Browns, who's a very good tight end. I don't know where they go from here. They're just an enigma to me, and I can't quite figure it out.
Bob, one thing I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, has Shane Steichen failed him? We talk about, this guy's supposed to be an offensive guru. What the hell's going on?
Well, look, when you hire somebody and they fail at their job, that's to me, a lot of times that's on the employer. Whether you didn't express the requirements of the job to him or the responsibilities. I mean, the communication seems to be really off between Richardson and the organization. Now, I mean, I know they had a 45-minute discussion one day about expectations and what they want from them. But, what we didn't figure out was what day they had that discussion. I would hope it would be the day that they benched him, but I'm getting the sense that came a few days afterwards. So, yes, Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard have definitely failed this kid in myriad ways. And now they've got a kid who probably doesn't feel real good about himself in his game, and they've got to get him back on track and hope that he gets back in there before the season's done.
Bob, it's been a season of, for the Colts, I don't know that anybody thought we'd be here. I don't think that we ever ruled out the possibility that we'd be here, but not this early, right? That's the one thing I'll say. Contrary to that, nobody thought we'd be here with Indiana football. Absolutely nobody.
No.
I think, I had said at the beginning of the year, I was all in on Curt Cignetti. I loved the guy's enthusiasm. I loved his kind of cockiness about him, kind of the attitude. And I thought they'd be, 6 or 7 wins at this point.
Yeah, me too.
Listen, they beat Ohio State, they're in, right? I don't care what happens against Michigan. I mean, I think they're going to beat Purdue.
If they are competitive against Ohio State, they are in the college football
unless they
playoff.
lose to Michigan and then are competitive against Ohio State, right?
I am assuming, because I'm just assuming that they're going to beat Michigan. Look, if they lose to Michigan, all bets are off. But if they beat Michigan, are competitive with Ohio State and show that they belong, and, of course, after they boat race Purdue, then, yeah, they're in. And this is – I'm going off on a little tangent here, but you remember John Eisenbarger?
Of course.
Who he's a friend of mine. He passed away, great IU player back in the Rose Bowl year. I was watching the game the other day, and I turned to my wife. I said, I wish John could see this. I mean, for all those old IU guys to see what this team is doing now is truly a present.
And maybe it's unfair, and I agree with that sentiment, obviously, Bob, and maybe this is unfair to even go with at this point, but I think when you're a fan of Indiana football, you're always looking for the other shoe to fall, right? And
right.
And so with this season, then, regardless of what happens here moving forward, there's the thought process by people of there's no way Curt Cignetti stays here. Am I being way too pessimistic with that thought? I'm not saying that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't see that happen anytime soon. I think he views IU as something of a sleeping giant, and he's the guy who's been brought in here to awaken that giant, and he's done the most amazing coaching job I think I've ever seen at the college level and maybe even the pro level. I mean, somebody was telling me this stat the other day, and I think it's right. If it's not, somebody will call in. They've got 44 players who are zero-star athletes out of high school.
Unbelievable. 44. Unbelievable, right?
That, my friend, is coaching and establishing a culture and having the right people in the right place.
I mean, hell, you were a 1-star, right?
Well, I could sign my name and I could walk from here to the mailbox. So sure.
Coming out of high school as a hockey player, you at least got a half a star, right?
Well, yeah, a quarter, maybe a half. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, yeah, surprising stuff, right? All right. Lastly, Bob, Pacers Magic tonight. Benedict Mathurin and Tyrese Halliburton are starting to hit somewhat of a stride, I think, that we anticipated. Yes. Halliburton's the one that I'm curious to see if he keeps it consistently. What say you?
Yeah, I think he's found it. I think, he was so much more aggressive, going to the basket, trying those floaters, getting to the hoop and finishing. I mean, that's all he's got to do is get those paint touches, and it opens up everything else. I think Mathurin, this is going to be like Wally Pipp. I think he's going to stay in the starting five, and I think it's going to be very, very difficult to bring back Nesmith at this point. But we'll see. Rick has his own way of doing things, and there's a lot to be said for Mathurin coming off the bench and being the primary scorer for that second unit. So I wouldn't have a problem either way, but I think the way he's playing now, I think he's gonna earn a spot in that starting lineup and start getting big minutes.
Bob Kravitz, of course, bobkravitz.com. What's upcoming in terms of the column, Bob?
Well, I'm trying to. I'm in a deep state of depression after the election, so I'm having a hard time getting motivated. But I'm going to probably do something about AR and and Stephanie White signed the other day, and I had a good long talk with her, so I got that coming up. So watch and read.
Hey, you were with me last night on this. I got back last night and basically was jet lagged, and so I failed to send out my annual tweet, Bob. But by working at a newspaper, and I formerly worked in television news, the election nights to me are always fun because the news department, they get the pizza, and they send out things and they pat themselves on the back for doing what the sports department does every single night of the year, right?
Exactly, and that's what I said last night. I said I wish I was a political writer tonight because A, I got a lot to say, and B, newsroom pizza.
Always. And then literally they're like, you don't understand. We got deadline and like the results didn't get in until 6. I'm like, I do understand because I did games that end at 10:30. You know what I mean?
This is what you want a challenge? Okay, I was joking with James Briggs because he wrote a really good column about the people we elected to state seats and all that stuff. I said, that's not fair on deadline. You could have written that 9 months ago.
True, that's true. Here's the thing, Bob.
Like we had Peyton Manning at 35-14 with 4 minutes to go. The Colts back.
That's exactly right. No, you're right.
That deserves some newsroom pizza right there, my friend.
That is exactly correct. I've always said, Bob, and I will die on this hill. You ready? I've always said this, whether it be print or electronic. You can always take the sports guy and airdrop him in to cover a news or political event and not notice a change. But you take one of the news people and try to get them to cover sports, and it is Katie bar the door, absolute Keystone Cops time every time.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that
every time.
But I don't want to piss off all my friends on the news side. So
that's right. All right, we'll get you a cheese and sausage. We'll get a little Lou Malnati sent your way or hot box pizza or something.
Lou's the best.
Good. It's the best.
All
I
right,
know. All right, Bob, we appreciate it.
All right, guys, take care.
Bob Kravitz joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. That's the one thing that Dave First and I used to joke about it all the time because, two-person department, and we're turning around games that finished at 11:15, and we got highlights and post-game and stuff on at 11:23, and the newsroom would send out pictures and congratulate each other because they're like, we didn't get the results till 6:15 and had it live at 11.
You know what?
Congrats.
The other point of synergy would be, though, for those two departments, if they happen to get a call on election night that's, hey, did they call Alaska yet? Have they called it? Just trying to.
Did a line cover last night the 6.5?
Looking for UC Santa Barbara.
That was always the best, man. And Sorensen every time. Buddy, do you need the number for Gamblers Anonymous? Huh? It's always the same guy, too. Want to know who won the San Jose State-Hawaii game. I got a fabulous text here. Fabulous text regarding what we were just talking about, and I love it. Love it. Because it involves a great analogy, and I'm always good for one of those. I'm talking about good for appreciating one, not good for opining one. And I'll tell you what somebody just sent me that I think is dead on perfect next. Here's a great text that I just received regarding Anthony Richardson. I think it's the perfect summary, actually. And it includes an analogy, which I love. Hey, Jake. AR puts fans in the seats. We were excited. They sold him as this elite athlete dual threat with the disclaimer that his passing game was going to take time. The problem they faced was the early injuries and their reluctance to utilize his strength, which is his run game. As a result, they mismanaged his usage and fans became impatient with his passing development. It's like if a salesman was trying to sell Cutco knives, but during the sales pitch, he cuts the meat with the wrong side of the knife. Use the sharp side, or his running abilities in this case, and that's where he's supposed to be elite. But they got away from it, and people got tired of the demonstration. Hard to argue any of that. If he was never going to develop a passing game, and I don't know that he's not going to still, but if for whatever reason, if they determine that Anthony Richardson is not an elite quarterback and that he can't pass the ball with regularity enough to be one, then do they still take advantage in some way, shape, or form of his ability to run the football?
Maybe the next administration will, because that's my biggest point with all of this. Ballard should be gone if that was misidentified that bad. But what he becomes for his career, if that's all he is, and
you're talking about Richardson.
Yes, Anthony Richardson. Yes, yeah. What he becomes the rest of his career is a more expensive, bigger bust labeled version of Taysom Hill. That's what he becomes.
Right.
He is a gadget player that has electric running ability, that you know what he's going to do when he's out there, but you don't know what to do to stop it from a running standpoint, which is how they use Taysom Hill for his whole career. He was an undrafted player. He was not drafted to be a franchise quarterback. He's, in fact, flexed into a tight end role at some point in time down there in New Orleans. But if that winds up being the final diagnosis for him, and we're still hopefully years away from that for his career's sake. I'm not saying that's all in Indianapolis, but for his career's sake, years from that. But if that is the prognosis, everybody that analyzed him as the next generational quarterback for this franchise needs to be held accountable, and that includes pink slips.
So much of that's fair. So much of the expectation of a quarterback and the payoff of expectation for any athlete, quarterback, point guard, pitcher, whatever, is where you're acquired and how you're acquired. And when you are acquired as a top 5 pick, then you are expected that you are going to be a franchise quarterback at some point. And the reality is we've talked about till we're blue in the face here, or in your case, blue in the tongue from the candy I gave you.
Indeed.
The reality is that historically speaking, when a quarterback is drafted and given the keys to a franchise based on how he was acquired and where he was acquired, and that then gets taken away for a while, the engine just never runs as efficiently with that quarterback for that particular car ever again. And they can go elsewhere and it work. Baker Mayfield.
Sam Darnold,
right? There are other guys. The thing to now that I think they need to take a look at, where Chris Ballard has really painted himself into a corner here, is this. The quarterback, everything was hinging on the quarterback paying off, right? They determined that it wasn't working out at this point. I didn't determine that. You didn't determine that. John Q. Public fan ticket buying public didn't determine that. They determined that. Whether it was disciplinary, whether it was injury, or whether it was maturity, they determined that the guy that they told us they were developing as their franchise quarterback, they told us they're not ready for him to be the franchise quarterback right now.
They told you to be patient, and they couldn't be patient.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. The Pacers came out 2 years ago and said, you're going to have to be patient with us. And it exceeded timeline. The Colts came out and said, you're going to have to be patient with us, and then perfectly said, Jimmy, they're the ones that pulled the patience card, right?
Yep.
And said, we're not. Now, where Chris Ballard has painted himself into the corner now is now they have to do the balancing act of, if they still believe Richardson can be the guy, they can't put him back in position until they feel that they have all of the supporting piece around it, so that there is nothing that is resting on his shoulders when he is planted back in for a while until he's comfortable. Because his shoulders, you're the one that told us. You had one quarterback in Andrew Luck that it was a shoulder that did him in, right? Even though ultimately it was the ankle that he retired from. But it was the shoulder that was injured. And in the case of the Colts, they're the ones that told us that he wasn't capable of everything that was on his shoulders. So now when you put him back in there, you've got to make sure that you're doing it and lightening the load that's around him for his own psyche. It's a complete mismanagement and paint into the corner that I don't know how they get themselves out of.
Am I being unfair to the Colts? And this is from comments Shane Steichen made to the media earlier today. When he's defending Joe Flacco, he's saying, it was just one game against Minnesota. Like, he's getting back into a rhythm. That's not an acceptable defense for me when the sole purpose of putting him in is that he was the veteran that's not going to get rattled in those moments.
Correct.
And not going to underperform.
That is correct. That is correct. What you were saying is we have a young player that's terribly inconsistent, so we're taking him out so that we can have a guy that we know what we're going to get out of him. And then that guy, when he shows up and doesn't play well, and you say, well, that's just an example of him being inconsistent. Well, that's what cost the other guy his potential to learn, right? And you can't. And again, I realize and I apologize for the fact that a lot of this is stuff that was probably said over the course of the week, but
it's still ongoing.
But and it's difficult, Jimmy, to tell me. Like, it's very difficult to sit here and tell me in the case of Richardson that you feel like they need to take a step back and let him watch to learn when he just got done doing that for a year.
Yeah.
He just sat and watched.
Yes.
What is he going to learn by watching now that he didn't learn by watching a year ago? At some point, you got to go out. At some point, you got to go out and do it, right? I go back. I remember when I was 22 years old, 23 years old, 24 years old, 25 years old. I was down in the Channel 6 bowels in the basement watching videotapes every night and editing tape and going over stuff on the regular basis and practicing with Ed Sorensen how to be a sportscaster for years. And one day he walked in and said, "Why are you still here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You're still here because you're afraid to go out there and do it. You got to go out and do it now. You've been watching me do this forever. You've been watching my videotapes and practicing doing my sportscasts in a closed studio for years now. You got to set aside your fear and you got to go out there and you got to do it. And you're never going to know whether or not you can do this for a living until you just go out and decide to do it and find out whether or not you don't know how cold the water is in the deep end until you just jump in." And in the case of Anthony Richardson, like at this point, at some point they've got to take the training wheels off of him and let him do it. And what they did is they babied and coddled him to the point where then when he didn't know exactly how to be a quarterback with all the responsibility that comes with it, it's partially because they completely babied him and never said to him, "You got to go out there and just do it. Just go." And once he started to try to just go and do it and they turned him loose into the wild, they're the ones that called him back and said, "You know what, like it seems too cold out and you forgot to take your coat. So come back in here." It's never going to work that way. They've completely mishandled the way that and only they know, maybe there is something going on behind closed doors we don't know about. Maybe there is. Maybe he really is hurt. Maybe he really did like have an altercation with teammates and lost the locker room. I don't know. But either way, no matter what it is, at this point, they've lost it.
And if, regardless of what it is, if it's character, if it is work ethic, if it is the time he's putting in, if it's he's too young, if it is whatever it is, that's not a pass for Chris Ballard. Your point as a general manager is not just to be able to evaluate what the player's going to do on the field. It's how they carry themselves off the field. That's why you have these hours-long pre-draft meetings when you're making a selection of this value. Like, I'm fine with having that conversation that maybe Anthony Richardson just isn't the guy. But if there's all these issues with him and baggage that may or may not be there, that doesn't absolve year 7, year 8 of this group. Like, it was your selection. It was your job to see those red flags if there were time being put in or immaturity issues. Like, that's not, "Oh, our bad, sorry, we'll try again better next time."
Oh, Jimmy, we've got a great locker room. We've got a lot of great vets. We got a lot of great guys.
Yeah.
That's
we got
the
a
other
great
thing.
culture here.
Listen.
Those guys will get them up to speed.
That's the biggest thing, right? I'm tired of hearing about how you can take and I don't think Anthony Richardson was a character risk.
I don't either.
I don't think this was a guy that was like going out and staying out to the clubs till 4 a.m, whatever else. I'll go back to this. I just think that there is an example that comes, there is an expectation that comes when you are the quarterback. If other guys are watching film sessions twice, you got to watch 3 times. If other guys are coming in at 5:45, you got to be there at 5:30. And, The other day when we had on Larry Triplett, I had a long conversation with him after the fact because I called to thank him for coming on the show, and we talked for a long time, and it was a really enlightening, fun conversation. And one of the things he told me, he was like, look, man, he's like, you have no idea. Peyton Manning, he goes, when we get together for like team reunions or like the Dallas Clark, Ring of Honor deal, he's like, Peyton Manning knows coming into it that every single person there is going to want to have pictures of Peyton Manning with their kids. He's like, he remembers every single player. He knows every guy. He knows where he went to school. He knows everything about. And he's like, and I'm talking about guys that were signed to like, 3-game contracts and then got waived or whatever else, or were the 55th guy on the 53-man roster. He's like, he knew who everybody was. He knew what their job was. He knew what their role was, and he treats them the same, whether it's James Mungo or Edgerrin James, right? And he's like, that's leadership. You just knew when you went in the locker room and Peyton Manning, and I've told the story 100 times, that on Wednesdays when Manning was available, I'd walk in the locker room and guys would be like playing a video game or somebody had music playing or whatever, and Manning would round the corner, and you could tell. Everybody was kind of waiting to see what Manning's mood was. Not because he was a bad guy, because he was the leader, and they all knew he was the leader, and he set the tone. That's veteran leadership, and he had that from the time that he got here. He also had the unique advantage that Peyton Manning had been the same with Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck's father played in the NFL, was the backup to, wait for it, Archie Manning, right? Andrew Luck's father was an executive in NFL Europe, where Andrew Luck grew up around professional players. Peyton Manning grew up around professional players. They saw it from the time that they could ever remember anything. What they saw was players in locker rooms. Anthony Richardson is a guy that, because he is a freak athlete, was put into a position where I don't know that he totally understood the dynamics of a locker room and what it means to lead one. Doesn't make him a bad guy. Doesn't mean that he's at fault there. But it is something that was a red flag about him in college, that you can't sit there and tell me that you weren't worried about that, and then a year later decide that that's the thing you're going to come up and tell me that is the thing you decided was the weakness of why he needs to be benched.
Today's plays of the day.
3-1 that it's going to take you 3 times to get the mic correct on starting that out. How about that?
I think you've had a massive payout right there. Before we start anything stateside, let's take a trip across the pond, shall we? Maybe. Start the plane up. Get it running.
I just got back from there.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Eddie apparently is still there.
You don't have it on the board over
Didn't
there?
know we were doing it.
Okay. Anyway, Champions League action.
Oh, champions. Sorry. It could have been different things there, Jimmy.
It's fair. That is fair. I'll wear the L on that. I should have given you the heads up ahead of time. Anyway, it is Champions League. Match day 4 of 8 over in Europe. We'll take Arsenal to win outright over Inter Milan. That taking place at 3 o'clock. We'll also take Barcelona laying 1.5 there on the spread as they take on Red Star Belgrade. Coming back to the States in college hoops, I'll take over 86.5 total points for the Indiana Hoosiers as they get things underway tonight against SIU Edwardsville. In the professional ranks, I'll lay the 5 on the Pacers against the Orlando Magic. They're favored by 5 tonight as they host Orlando. I will also take over 16.5 total points for Benedict Mathurin. Eddie, any plays from you?
No, sir. I was trying to pull up the IU game to see if they had player props out or not. But
I'm going to give you a player prop on that game.
Okay.
I guarantee that Robbie Hummel's doing that game on television. I know that because he was on my flight last night from Chicago.
You got a little scouting report ahead of time,
I did.
Huh?
We talked about Zach Edey, actually. I don't know that we've mentioned that Zach Edey had, you guys might have, that he had a huge night the other night.
We didn't touch on it in detail, but he did have a huge night the other night, and I'm curious to see how that continues to play out. I'm not highlighting the highs or the lows. I think the second game of the season, he winds up fouling out very early in that game, but then was it the first game of the season? Yeah. Winds up fouling out very early in that contest, but then the other night, as he continued to progress, I think he was like 11 of 12 from the field, hit a step into 3, which is what everybody told you about that was in the Purdue camp of, no, he can hit beyond the arc. We just don't need him to do that. If he continues to play that way, yeah, he's going to be in the league for a long time. It's going to be a great story.
But yeah, Hummel, it is funny because I said, so what game are you flying for? And he said, well, I got Indiana tomorrow night, meaning tonight. And I said, now who are they taking on? And he said, SIU. I go, and then he goes, Edwards. And he said, it's always hard.
Yeah.
He did say, he goes, it's hard doing games like that because you got to know the depth of the roster, right? Because teams get way up and then they start putting people in, and it just becomes obviously a bigger challenge. But either way, I do think Indiana's going to be, both Indiana and Purdue are going to have good years, I think. I did meet a guy at a bar in Scotland. As I mentioned earlier, we went out to watch the Scotland versus Fiji international rugby tournament, whatever. And we went to watch that game, and it was super fun. And we were in this old bar, and sitting next to us were like 4 or 5 guys. It was super fun because there were guys that had grown up together. They were all just boys out watching. There was a soccer match, and then that game was on. Lads, that's right. Okay. And one of them looked just like Matt Painter. And so I said, hey, do you know Matt Painter? And he goes, no, but I know his brother. Okay. Which I guess is just a common thing to say in Scotland. J&V has arrived.
You're back.
John, you lost weight since
colonized by Wanker. 50 pounds.
That's right.
Down
nice.
50.
Are you really?
5-0. Yes. So.
I don't know if you saw this or not, John, but I did not go to the world's worst toilet in Scotland, but I did go to the stairwell from the opening scene of Trainspotting.
Go hang out with Mark Renton.
That's exactly
right.
Do some
heroin.
I saw right where he got hit by the car.
Yeah.
The stairwell right there with the tunnel. It was pretty awesome.
Did you go to, what was the club name where he met the chick?
So, well, here's the thing. The entire, not that anybody here knows the variations of Scotland. I did not know this. Even though the movie takes place, Trainspotting is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Even though it takes place in Edinburgh in a neighborhood called Leith, which is kind of like Mass Ave, because it's a neighborhood now that's like super trendy. The entire film, other than that scene, was filmed in Glasgow, not Edinburgh.
You can't tell me, though, Begbie was your favorite character in that, right?
I think I liked Spud. Wasn't he one of the characters?
Huh?
Wasn't Spud one of the characters?
Spud crapped the bed, remember? At his girlfriend's place at her parent's house. And flung the dung all over the kitchen table.
That's exactly right. They all had some problems in that movie, right?
Spud crapped the bed. Yeah, that's too bad for Spud.
What's on the big program?
We got Mike Koenig, IU center, is going to join us today. And Gary Danielson. We're going to talk up Michigan IU on Saturday.
I think Indiana can lose that game, and if they beat Ohio State, still stay in it.
People wonder, too. If they were to get the 12 seed, too, and you're lined up with BYU, for example, like it was last, don't you want to be lined up with BYU? I mean, I guess you'd be looking ahead, so I guess you wouldn't want that.
Well, I'd want to just for the Holiday
BYU
Bowl
in
79
the second
aspect,
round.
right?
Yeah, but, yeah. But no, they, Kurt Cignetti talking today is doing his best to dial everybody down, and, I'm assuming Mike Koenig will do the same thing. Redshirt senior center's been through it all down there, certainly, and he's a guy that's really active in social media, but understands, I think, when it's time to get serious and when it's time to have some fun. He had that video with Taven Jackson, I think, not too long ago or whenever it was together. But he is a good dude, and they haven't steered me wrong yet. The Kegger gave us Justice Ellison. He was great, and we'll talk to Koenig a little
Ellison's
bit later
having a great year, too.
Yes,
right?
he is.
Been a good story.
It has been a great story. Did you think they got hosed last night with the 9-hole?
Nah, because here's why. Because they, as I mentioned earlier, their strength of schedule is still in front of them. They got a chance now to really make an impact and make a difference there, right?
Pacers tonight, Orlando. We'll talk that up. I thought the Pacers played finally in the fashion in which we had expected at the beginning of the season, but really, especially over the course of the entirety of the game, had not seen. We finally saw that.
Especially from Halliburton,
the other night
right?
against Halliburton and Miles. And again, Halliburton, it all starts with him. And it's not even so much how he scores the basketball. It's how he gets other guys shots, and he was doing that against the Mavericks. They were on a second of a back-to-back, but I thought it was more the impact of what he did and what they were finally doing as a team that we expected. Getting Orlando, no Paolo Banchero later on tonight for the Magic, right?
Yep.
He's
coming
out.
off his 50 spot last time they played, but he is out
50
on
burger,
IR. So oblique injury, I think.
I don't
right?
say 50 burger.
I don't either. I don't say Sega
What
Baba
nerds
either.
say
so
that, by
thank
the
you.
way?
Right here, baby.
You
right
say
here.
50 burger?
I love a good burger, especially when it's
Okay.
50.
50 burger. Schultz says burger too, doesn't he?
Yes.
He does that purposely.
Yes, he does. All right, J&B's up next. We'll be
Ready.
back with you noon tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to Query & Company.